Yep, right, 599 miles on the Honda GB350s now, which means it's ready for its first service. Now, just to recap, obviously I bought this bike from Miles Kingsport in Hull, a dealership that's been going, I believe, since 1976. Now, I bought my first sort of 3 motorcycles from them before I changed to other brands back in the 1980s, the early 1980s. And at that time, I chose Miles Kingsport because my elder brother had bought his first motorcycle from there as well, a Honda GB350s or something. Now, in the intervening 40-something years since I got my first bike from them, they have moved premises once or twice, but they're still under the same ownership. And it was a pleasant surprise on this particular occasion to meet up with Tim, who I think is the owner of Miles Kingsport, and he sold me my first 3 bikes. As you know, it's common practice for me on this channel to carry out all my own maintenance, including services. I've produced several videos over the years of oil changes on various different bikes, but on this occasion I thought I would do something different. Now, one of the main reasons for this is the outstanding good value for money offer that Honda currently runs for these bikes, which is £299 paid up front, and that covers all your servicing costs by their professional mechanics for 3 years. This is a programme which is heavily subsidised by Honda UK. They pay into this, they sort of top the amount up that you pay. So, you know, you're not paying anywhere near what this would cost if you were just going in and paying for each service individually. It's really good value for money. And I thought the flip side as well is that, you know, on doing it this way, it allows me to provide you with a video actually showing a professional mechanic doing the servicing. So you're sort of getting 2 bites of the cherry with this particular video, because A, it's showing you exactly how to do an oil change and first service on one of these bikes, and B, if you're the kind of motorcyclist that doesn't do your own servicing, you can see exactly what you're getting for your money with this particular servicing package that Honda is offering. Now, my bike was allocated to a very pleasant young man called Ben, a fully qualified master mechanic. I've got to admit I didn't know what a master mechanic was, I had to look it up. He showed me the official servicing schedule for these bikes. Apparently the tappets don't need doing until the 4,000 mile mark, and they don't do the tappets in with an oil service. The main reason being that obviously the engine has to be stone cold in order to check and adjust the tappets. So there's a bit of a conflict between an oil change and tappet adjustment if you try to do them all in the same day. Now, this might seem a little bit inconvenient for some customers, because it does mean that you're going to have to take the bike in twice a year for servicing, once for the tappets and once for your oil change. But Honda have scheduled the servicing this way to ensure that tappet adjustment accuracy is spot on and there are no issues or conflicts caused by sort of residual heat retention of the engine. That's the way I always do it. I always do the tappet adjustment and the oil change on my bikes on different days. I never do them both on the same day. So I'm pleased to see that Honda are taking that approach. As you've just seen, Miles Kingsport have a very well appointed service centre, and they exclusively use Silcoline products in all their servicing. I mean, this is their retail stand. They do use sort of bulk products for actual servicing to keep the costs down. I know everybody has different opinions on which oil etc is the best. Silcoline has always been my go-to product for at least a couple of decades, so again, you know, I'm very comforted to know that they're using a brand that I'm familiar with and I trust. Now, at the factory, Honda put a basic mineral oil in the bikes to assist with the braking period. At the 600 mile service, it is replaced with a 5W30 semi-synthetic. And as I've said before in previous videos, once this semi-synthetic Silcoline has been put in my bikes after the initial braking period, I don't know whether it's a sort of a psychological placebo effect, but the bikes always feel and perform much better. I noticed a big difference in the bike when I rode home. So your first service will comprise of an oil and filter change, a general check over of the bike to make sure that there's nothing wrong, and a check of the chain, and usually your chain stretches a little bit in the first few hundred miles, so it will probably need adjustment. They also clean and lube the chain. Now, to ensure that nothing is missed out, Ben, and in fact all technicians, need to work from a checklist as they go through the service, and you do get a copy of that checklist when your bike's returned to you. Now, when I set off with the bike to take it to Miles Kingsport, I was actually about 15 miles short of the target mileage, so I had a bit of a ride around first, so the engine was good and hot. This is important, it gets all the contaminants, swarf, etc. from the braking process up into suspension in the engine oil, so it will effectively be flushed out when the old engine oil is dropped. And I would say he actually started draining the oil no more than 20 minutes after I arrived with the bike. If you don't run the bike prior to dropping the oil and the oil is cold, there's a big probability that most of those particulates that you want to get out of the engine at your first service, or any service for that matter, will have collected in the bottom of the sump, so they'll be washed out of the sump plug less efficiently than if you do it this way. Which means it's more likely that those particulates and particles of metal will remain in the engine even after your oil change. So it is worth warming the engine up and, running it for a while to get all those particles up into suspension before that you drop the oil. You should never do it cold, really. As you can see, the used engine oil was very clean. A lot of people, ask me why you change it when the oil's clean. Well, the reason that you do this is there's a high degree of wear during the running process, a lot of metal particles in the engine oil, and you want to get rid of that because it effectively will turn into a grinding paste and then it will accelerate wear if it's left in there. But it is good to see that after 600 miles the engine oil was very clean, which means that the piston rings have sealed properly, there's no blow-by or carbonisation that's been dissolved or mixed in with the oil. It's a sign of good engine health. Now, the next thing that Ben did was obviously to remove the old filter. You are likely to get some engine oil running down the side of the engine and onto the exhaust, so before taking the oil filter cover off, obviously he covered the exhaust over with an absorbent rag to minimise the amount of spillage onto the exhaust. He then removed the old oil filter, ready for the new one to go in, and just left everything to drain down for a while he turned his attention to other items on the bike that need to be checked. Altogether, Ben left the oil sort of draining from the engine via the sump plug and the aperture for the oil filter for about half an hour, and while that was going on, he went round and checked the bike out thoroughly. He checked the tread depth and he checked the tyres for abnormal wear. He also checked the bearings on the wheels to make sure that nothing had come loose, as well as the headstock bearings. The brake pads were checked for wear, as well as the discs. He gave the bike a thorough going over to make sure that nothing had gone awry during the bike's initial 600 mile shakedown. Once he'd carried out a thorough visual check over of the bike, he then recorded a short video explaining what components he'd checked and what he'd found when he'd checked them. This little video is then sent to the customer, so the customer's informed of the general status of the bike. And then while he was waiting for the last few drops of oil to exit the engine, he turned his attention to the motorcycle's chain. First of all, he thoroughly cleaned it. He used a solvent-based chain cleaner to clean the chain, and then left the chain for the solvents to evaporate completely before he went ahead with the actual re-lubing of the chain. While that evaporation was taking place, he went round, checked and topped up the tyre pressures. He then popped in the new oil filter, replaced the oil filter cover, and then turned his attention to the sump plug. And I should point out that throughout this entire service, he was constantly going around with a rag, wiping up drips, making sure that no oil change residue remained on the bike. Now, this is important. In fact, he even went around with some degreaser at the end of the service, because if there are any drips that aren't caught during this stage, it can lead the customer to think that they've got a leak from one of the joints somewhere after the service. And, you know, obviously that's going to waste a lot of the customer's time and a lot of the service centre's time if they're bringing it back for a leak they suspect, which is actually a non-existent leak. I mean, I've done it myself in my younger days where I haven't cleaned up properly. Then there's been a few drops of oil on the frame or on the garage floor the next day, and I've been convinced that I've got a leak. And what it actually was, it was just that I hadn't cleaned up properly after myself. So this is actually a very important part of any service. Now, for the sump plug, he set up his torque wrench to 24 Newton meters for the final tightening sequence. He then put a fresh aluminium sealing washer onto the sump plug and replaced it. Of course, it's time to refill the engine with fresh engine oil. As I said, this is a 5W30 Silcoline semi-synthetic. Now, they do use a bulk supply of oil rather than using retail packs, because obviously it works out more economical for them and for the customer. And it works a little bit like a petrol pump. It dispenses exactly the amount of oil that you require, which in this case is exactly 2 litres. Then replaced the oil filler cap and yet again went around and degreased the entire engine, got rid of the old engine oil, and continued to make sure there was no residual oil on the engine anyway before moving on to the next stage, which was the lubrication of the chain. Again, he was using a Silcoline aerosol based chain lubricant, and I've got to say I was really impressed by the precision at which he was able to apply this chain lube. I wish I could do it that good. I need more practice, I think. It got virtually no lubricant on the wheels or the tyres. It hit the chain from every single angle, and then with a cloth it went down and just wiped off any excess from the chain and then left it to dry, ready for the bike to be ridden. He even polished up the rear sprocket so that it looked like new. Now, Ben considered that the chain was a little bit slack and that it needed tightening up. He had to take it off the workbench in order to do that, to get it onto a firm level surface. He loosened the axle off just enough so that the adjusters would be able to work, but without making the axle too loose that the wheel started slopping about, because we all know what that can lead to. I mean, I've shortened this sequence because it took about 3 minutes, but he made all the necessary adjustments and then checked the chain tension with his weight on the bike. And when he was happy with the chain tension, he went ahead and retightened the axle. Now, me and you, when we're doing this, we usually use something like a steel rule or something, both to check the state of the tension and to check that the adjusters are equal on each side. He's a master mechanic. He can do this by feel and by eye. There weren't any problems. And he certainly managed to do this more quickly and more accurately than I'm able to do. And when he'd finished, he tightened the rear axle up to 88 Newton meters using a torque wrench. Now, ordinarily, that would be the end of the service. They don't normally do a diagnostics check unless either the customer's reported a possible issue, which would require a diagnostics check, or the bike is in one of its later services where they just need to check the condition of certain sensors on the bike. But Ben did agree to carry out this procedure and just show me and you how it all works. But we had a little issue. Now, normally, air-cooled bikes, there is always that worry when they're at a standstill idling, they may overheat, which is a particular issue with these lean burn engines that everybody is required to make these days. Now, I can't remember the full details of how this works, but I remember reading up on it when I did the review a few months ago. This bike has a precision oil cooling system. It's got, I think it's an offset crank which allows them to precisely squirt cooling oil onto certain critical components that keeps the engine temperature about 10% lower than would otherwise be possible with a normal air-cooled motorcycle. Now, it's so efficient. We had this bike running. The bike's got to be running and it's got to be up to normal operating temperatures before the diagnostics can work. And we had the bike running for 15 minutes in a room in summer, and he couldn't get the bike up to the required temperature for the diagnostics to take place. Now, there's no oil cooler on this bike as such. It's just a really efficient oil air-cooled bike. It's so efficient, it's impossible to get the bike up to normal operating temperature at a standstill. So there's absolutely no worry about this engine ever overheating. What we had to resort to in the end, I mean, he needed to do a quick test ride of the bike anyway. He had to take it out for a blast to get the engine up to temperature. And even then, once the bike was no longer under load and it was just sat there idling, you could see it on the computer screen gradually cooling down after the ride. Amazing technology. But he did eventually manage to get the engine up to 102 degrees centigrade, just enough for the diagnostics to kick in and actually start monitoring all the sensors on the bike. Now, another thing that may have come into play here as well, of course, is Silcolene's oil, because they do boast exceptional oil cooling with their semi-synthetic and synthetic oils. And as you can see here, it took another couple of minutes, but we just reached the point where the diagnostic system would accept a full test of all the different sensors. There's a total of 12. If they show up in red, there's a problem. If they're all blue, everything's A-OK. And as you would expect, everything came up in blue, everything was fine. Really clever system, really clever cooling system. And from what I understand, as you were just sort of seeing them flashing up in red there, that was it actually testing each of the sensors individually. I mean, I know we all complain about the complexity of modern motorcycles, but with an ability like this to be able to pinpoint an issue with a motorcycle rather than manually removing each component and checking it or testing it individually, it is going to save your average customer a lot of money, and it saves a lot of headaches for the technician that's working on the bike. Right, so a big thank you to Miles Kingsport for allowing me the privilege of filming the first service on my GB350. I do appreciate it. And a special thanks to Ben for putting up with me and being patient with me during the filming of this video. He really went above and beyond to accommodate me. I'm sure he could have carried out this service far quicker if I hadn't been there. I will of course give a detailed report on how the bike is coming on a little bit later in its life, a couple of weeks from now, because things have improved significantly since I last spoke to you about the performance of the bike. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. There are other ways you can support me, by leaving a like or by subscribing to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, or you can help me out with donations via my Patreon page PayPal donations, details of which are in the video description down below, or you can use the super thanks button, which is just below the picture that you're watching now. Either way, it's much appreciated but not essential. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.